Hey folks, I'm Stephanie and welcome back to my channel. Welcome for the first time if it's your first time here. Welcome back, obviously, if you've been here before. Today I'm really excited to tell you that I have a physical copy of my book. Oh my god. Anyway, I'm incredibly excited. So this is my first book. I've always considered myself a writer and I have always been writing since I was old enough to know how to write, basically. And I've never really published my work before. I've always really held it close to my chest, and I'm a performer and I sing and stuff, but my writing is super personal. So this is really exciting. I mentioned it last week because I also did a one-woman show earlier this year with the same name, Bad Sex and Other Problematic Analogies. If you saw the one-woman show, it has all of the essays that I read there and then a ton more. So it's super exciting. I've got a link below if you're interested. But otherwise, I'm going to talk to you guys today about piercings. So I'm not a piercer. I'll start out right at first and foremost, but I worked in a piercing shop for about 3 years as a counter person. So I had to know a lot of stuff about piercings. I knew a lot of stuff about jewelry. I used to think that I would never be able to learn fractions in my life and that they were going to be completely irrelevant to me. But all of the jewelry is measured in fractions of an inch. So it actually was, something that came in handy when I worked there, and I really honed it while I was working at the shop. But anyway, I'm just going to talk a little bit about jewelry today and piercers and where to look for certain things. So I can't keep count of how many piercings I have, and I have retired some piercings. So that's when you take your jewelry out and you just let it close up. And some piercings you retire and they don't really go away, and so it's all over the place. But I have my lobes pierced. I used to have 2 holes in each lobe, but as I stretch them, which these are now at 1 inch or 25 millimeters if you're not American, but after I stretch my lobes, I really can't get to these second holes anymore. So those don't really exist. I kind of retired them. I used to have a conch piercing, but I don't have that anymore. I have a rook, which is this little guy in here. I have an industrial piercing. I have a tragus. I have my septum pierced. It's 1 piercing, but I have it stretched and there are 2 rings. I have high nostrils. They're not super high. They're not really like a regular nostril. They're more like mid nostrils. A philtrum. I have 2 lip piercings. I never had a tongue piercing, just the split. I used to have a smiley, which I don't have anymore, and that was one of my favorite piercings I ever had. I'll talk about that a little bit. And then I have 2 little cartilage piercings over here. Piercings that you can't see, to be perfectly honest. I don't have nipple piercings anymore, but I have had my nipples pierced horizontally, and I took those out and let them heal. I then had them done vertically at a larger size, took those out. Now I don't have any piercings, but I do have a vertical clitoral hood piercing, which is a genital piercing. So I'll talk about those too. So as far as how many piercings I have, I already lost count, but if you were counting, good for you. And so I have a ton of piercings. I've been pierced a lot of times. Everything in my head, with the exception of my lobes, is gold. The posts on all of these are titanium, but I have rose gold everywhere. So rose gold here, rose gold, rose gold, rose gold. The last pieces I got were these tiny little rings. So tons of gold. I'm a gold fiend. And I probably only have as much gold as I do because of where I worked. So I worked in a shop that's a little more high-end, and they specialized in fine metal jewelry for facial and body piercings. So it was really cool, but that means I also got my jewelry at a discount. So I'm really, really grateful. I also got more piercings because I worked there. So before I worked there, I didn't have any of these. I had my septum and 1 nostril. I had lobes that were way smaller. I ended up feeling comfortable enough to get more piercings because I worked somewhere where it was acceptable, which was a piercing shop. If you're curious to find a good piercing shop, how do you know where to find a good piercer? So a good rule of thumb, of course it's not a guaranteed thing, is to look on safepiercing.org. So that is the Association of Professional Piercers, the APP in the United States. It's actually international. And there's a lot of things that they have to go through in order to become an APP member. They have to prove that they use certain sterilization techniques. They have to show that their shop uses jewelry that's appropriate. So they have to do a lot of things to join the APP. However, the APP doesn't regulate, you know, how they are personally, if you're gonna build a rapport with them. So that's something to think about. And of course, if you already have a piercer that you really, really like, keep going to that piercer. Just because they're not on APP's website doesn't mean that that piercer isn't a professional, clean, like great piercer. They just might not be a member of the APP. It's just a great rule of thumb. If you really don't know where to start and you want to look for a piercer, you can use their location tool and put in your zip code and find the nearest APP piercer to you. Now, the shop that I worked at was exclusively a piercing shop. They don't do tattoos, it's just piercing. So I used to say that because that was all that we did, we were the best at it. So I know a lot of information and I like to share that information. So a lot of questions that are commonly asked are like, how do you know a good piercer? Which that's a good rule of thumb. How do you know good jewelry? So you can't tell any jewelry just by looking at it, like what material it's made of. But one thing that you can look out for is internally threaded jewelry versus externally threaded jewelry. So externally threaded jewelry is what you're gonna find at any like super, super cheap place that you can get jewelry. If you're gonna get jewelry at Hot Topic, Spencer's, any little place at the mall, most all of it is gonna be externally threaded. And that goes through the same as like really crummy shops. So what do I mean by externally threaded and internally threaded? So externally threaded jewelry means the screw part is on the stick and it screws into the ball. That's externally threaded. Internally threaded means that there's a hollow point at the end of the bar and the ball has a little screwy bit and that screws into the bar and not the other way around. So there's a lot of reasons that this jewelry is better. One, it's more secure. Two, because when you get a fresh piercing or even a piercing that's healed, you really don't want to drag that screw-shaped piece of metal in and out of a piercing. I keep doing this like I'm talking about a nipple piercing, but that's a great example. But any piercing, you really don't want to push that screwy end through the tissue. It's not good for it, but especially not for a fresh piercing. So if you're being pierced, you're going to want something that's internally threaded. It usually means that it's a little bit more expensive, but a lot of times, especially when it comes to piercing jewelry, you are going to get what you pay for. So that doesn't mean that just because it's more expensive, it's better. Don't always go for gold. People always want to ask about gold. You want implant grade metals like implant grade stainless steel or implant grade titanium. Titanium is great because it's not magnetic, so you can go through like an x-ray, an MRI. Sometimes your doctors will still insist you take it out if you can't prove that it's titanium, in which case a lot of piercers will also sell retainers that are made of glass. Plastic is also an option. Those are really, really great if you need something to keep the piercing open, but you have to take metal out because you're having a medical procedure or something like that. Different piercings take different amount of times to heal. You can usually gauge by how thin or thick the skin is and by how much blood circulation is in there. So the tongue is actually one of the fastest healing piercings. Even though it's a thick piece of skin, there's a really, really fat artery that comes right down the middle, pumping a lot of blood in and out. So that usually heals in about 4 to 6 weeks. The other piercing that heals that quickly is actually a vertical clitoral hood piercing. So it's a genital piercing, and a lot of like labia minora, like the inner labia piercings, those heal really quickly too, because that tissue is super, super thin, and again, a lot of blood flow in that area. Lip piercings are usually going to be about a 6 to 8 week healing time. That's the same as the earlobes. Nostrils are similar to cartilage piercings, which is the skin up here, which these have all different names. There's a helix, outer helix, which are these, inner helix. I told you I have a tragus, conch, rook, a doth. There's all sorts of cartilage piercings. Most cartilage piercings, rule of thumb, are going to heal in about 6 to 12 months. The key with cartilage piercings is you cannot sleep on them. A ton of people will tell you, oh, it doesn't even hurt. It doesn't matter that it doesn't hurt. The issue is when you sleep on one, you're gonna end up making it crooked because the angle of the pressure that you're putting on it, and while it's still healing, is gonna turn inside of your ear. So the big thing is not to sleep on cartilage piercings, which is a really, really hard thing to do, especially for 6 months to a year. One thing that's really helpful is if you get a neck pillow, like a travel pillow, and you put that down and you sleep with like your ear in the little hole of the travel pillow, that's super, super helpful. Nostril piercings take about the same time, but you're not usually sleeping on your face, so they're not as big of a deal. Septum piercings, which are these, are going to heal in about 6 to 8 weeks. It's not through that thick part of cartilage that you feel when you reach up in your nose. If you do stick your fingers up there, you'll feel you have that hard tissue, and then right between where this skin starts and that cartilage ends, you'll feel this really thin little piece of tissue. They call that the sweet spot. And that little piece of membrane is actually where your piercing is going to go for a septum. So they heal pretty quickly. When your nostril gets pierced, at least for me, I had like tears out of one eye. When you get your septum pierced, you kind of get them out of both eyes. But I would say a septum actually is less painful to me and takes less time to heal than a nostril piercing. Nipple piercings, depending on, you know, if you have smaller nipples or if you have larger nipples. Smaller nipples are going to tend to be like 4 to 6 months. Larger nipples are going to be more like 6 to 12, even longer if you have really large breasts. A lot of times because bras can inhibit that. They can be kind of irritating. Bras are helpful in that they keep them in place and you're not jiggling around and they hurt less, but also if you have larger breasts, the pressure on them is just a lot more. So I talked about that earlier. I had my nipples pierced twice. The first time they were vertical and I had those pierced at a 14 gauge. I kept those piercings for about 4 years and then I took them out. I left them out for a couple of months and then I got them redone vertically with an 8 gauge barbell. Yes, girl, it was thick and it was horrible, but it did heal faster. It's a great idea actually if you have larger breasts or larger nipples to get them pierced at a thicker size. But I had them done at an 8 gauge and I kept those for about 3 years and then I just ended up taking them out because I felt like even under the best circumstances, with as large as my chest is, my nipples were always like kind of like irritated or like swollen, and I mean I took great care of them. I had good jewelry, great fitting jewelry, everything, but just I never really felt comfortable with them, so I just took them out and it's all fine. Navel piercings are very common, but the shop that I worked at actually turns away probably about 60 to 70% of the people that come in for navel piercings. That sounded weird to me when I first started working there, but when I learned the reasoning why, it actually made a lot of sense. So just about anybody can get their navel pierced, but not everybody should. Now this has absolutely nothing to do with body size. I want to make that very clear. I saw them pierce belly buttons of people that were large and small, like all kinds of sizes. It has to do with the shape of the actual navel. So not the body, but the navel. They're looking for a really specific little shelf that's of skin that sits above there. And if you have that little shelf, they'll have you kind of sit, stand, lay down. They want to see how it moves around. And based on whether or not you have enough skin in that particular spot is what decides whether or not that they'll pierce you. So again, I want to clarify, it's not body size. We would tell people it's anatomy dependent, but that anatomy is not the size of the body. It is specifically the shape of the navel. Those piercings under the best qualities tend to heal in 6 to 12 months. Now the reason that they wouldn't pierce everyone is because I don't know about you, but I knew tons of girls in high school that all had their belly button pierced and they all grew out. Because if you don't have that little lip of skin, you're not piercing in the right spot for it to heal properly. It's basically a surface piercing, and the reason that they have you get up and sit down and move all around is because they want to see how your skin presses up on that part of your body. So if there's not a lot of movement there, they're like, yeah, that'll heal great. But if there is, they don't want to leave you with a scar, they want to leave you with a piercing. So if it's not going to work out, listen when somebody tells you that. Don't just go to another piercer who's going to do it anyway. The last piercing that I'm going to talk about right now are genital piercings. So like I said, there are tons of genital piercings, whether you have a vulva or if you have a penis, there are tons of options. Some of them are just aesthetically pleasing and some of them are actually stimulating. Some of them take a very long time to heal. Some of them take a very limited amount of time to heal. I want to talk a lot particularly about the vertical clitoral hood piercing. So that is the most common genital piercing among anybody and it's one of the fastest healing piercings. It's very popular. So if you'll hear people say a lot of times that they want to get their clitoris pierced or that they have their clitoris pierced, oftentimes they do not actually mean the clitoris, even if they think they do. The majority of the time, it's actually the clitoral hood. So the clitoral hood is a little piece of tissue that sits above the clitoris, and the jewelry goes through that piece of tissue and rests on the clitoris. So it's still really stimulating, but it is not through the clitoris. It just rests on top of it. And that's super common, really easy to heal, 4 to 6 weeks. I have one, it's a lot of fun. I've had it for a number of years. It was actually done by Elaine Angel, who is like a world famous piercer. She pierced Lenny Kravitz. I used to like to make jokes that they say every time you sleep with someone, you're sleeping with everyone that they've ever slept with. I like to say that she touched Lenny Kravitz's genitals and then she touched mine. So basically me and Lenny Kravitz have slept together. Anyway, continuing on, there are tons of genital piercings, and I want to include websites for you to check out below. You could also check out Elaine Angel's book, The Piercing Bible. That's actually what inspired me to get my piercing. I used to think I was not a person who would ever do that, never in my life. And then I read the book and I learned more about the piercing and I learned more about the process, and I was like, actually, that sounds kind of cool. So I want you guys to check all that stuff out. Of course, if you have any more questions about piercings or about jewelry, where to find a piercer, any of that stuff, I would love to hear from you, so you can leave a comment below. Of course, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I hope you found this video informative and entertaining. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, folks. Bye.